Hello, everyone. I am Przemek Bosak, your host for today's Summer of AI event, and I will help facilitate and collect questions for this panel discussion. Robert will introduce the presenters in just a moment. This event is...
We would call it writing with and without.
Oh, yes, that's right. Writing with and without generative AI.
It's our short here.
Generative AI has surprised the world with its facility for writing and conversation. The ease with which one can now prompt AI to write and converse in real language has led educators of writing, languages, arts, and communications to rapidly reconsider or recommit to their pedagogies, course activities, and disciplinary justifications. This session will use short, lightning round presentations and a discussion panel to explore how campus stakeholders in the humanities are integrating or foregoing generative AI in their instructional practices. The recording of this video presentation will be available at a later date. Please subscribe to the Summer of AI newsletter to stay informed about related AI tips. If you have any questions throughout this event, do not hesitate to place them in the online chat or the Q&A tab. A host will collect them and notify the presenter or presenters. A thumbs up on your message or question will be used to confirm your question was received by the host. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Robert and the panel.
Yeah, so Robert Baird in the Center for Innovation, Teaching and Learning here. I'm really excited to have this panel. You know, AI, since it's been around a long time, but in the last 2 years with ChatGPT, really it's the writing folks and English, and it's because we have a long tradition there. Some of us going back with machine learning, and so I think since it is a language writing textual technology, I think folks like us are a lot of people are paying attention to what the English and Humanities thinks about these tools. And what I really like about the panel, Dan is here from Tech Services, but you're also working on
Yeah, I'm working on completing a master's degree in arts in English composition from Eastern Illinois.
Yeah, and so a great perspective of the learning management systems and the tech side, but actually thinking deeply about writing, and I've appreciated that. And then Andrew Moss, you're here, and I've just admired you as a teacher, and I saw your presentation over at Siebel Design Center and said, you've got to do it here, because when I was sitting there, it was like, oh, AI writing assignments, and then you really have that assignment that is just brilliant. The students are engaged, everybody's happy, you're working, and you're going to talk more about that.
I better do a good job to that.
Well, it was just the little bell went off. There can be these great semester-long assignments about writing and life and creation, and they don't necessarily have to even use AI. So I like that. And then talk about practitioners of writing and craft and students, and really having Carolyn and Antonio, you're here, the Writers Workshop. Lots of years of experience and just seeing those students over the years, and now especially coming to you and hearing and seeing firsthand. And then Antonio, I think you're busy working on a thing called a PhD, I believe.
Yes.
And I was, I caught you on another presentation, and I think I was on a focus group with you, and you're so thoughtful about this that I thought you got to be here. That's great. And Danny, I think you hit the daily Illini with some amazing thoughts and critiques and strong critiques and questions about AI writing, and so I know you want to say a little bit about your situation on the campus and stuff.
Sure, yeah. So I teach in the English department. My background is in both literature and creative writing, and yeah, I feel like I'm going to be very much a Luddite today, but that we'll have a discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I keep coming back to, the Luddites, because it's shorthand for people, but the Luddites actually knew a lot about technology, and so their critiques were pretty strong because they lived through industrialization and they loved the other hand. So we stereotype them as not paying attention. So I think we're informed critics of AI here today. So. But we want to jump straight into our lightning rounds, and I think Andrew, you were kind enough to go first and kick us off.
Great, thank you. As a little bit of a prologue, I walked into CITL 15 years ago, and walked out a different teacher after a half an hour talking to somebody about my teaching. So it's good to be here and give back a little bit to Siddle that had a big impact on my teaching. My name's Andrew Moss. I'm a senior lecturer in English in the program in professional writing. I teach business and technical writing 250. And in that course, students complete a collaborative writing and research project. The program sort of template for an assignment sequence suggests a SWOT report of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats report. It has 4 sections. Think about 4 sections and 4 students and just how bad that collaborative writing assignment can turn out if you're not careful. I think we're very careful teachers and good teachers in the program of professional writing, but if you're not careful, it can get really formulaic really quickly. The genre itself offers very little in the way of social other action to just sort of on its own. It can be a little bit uninspiring for teachers and students, as I said, if you're not careful. And it doesn't really align with some of our programs of teaching values like authentic audiences and problem solving as a key component of writing. I'm also an affiliate faculty at Siebel Center for Design, and that role I'm collaborating with Dr. Carrie James, who's just fantastic. We're leading a project investigating the use of human-centered design in the college writing classroom. And both of those things I'm going to talk about today. If you aren't familiar with human-centered design is an iterative process of investigating and addressing human problems. It features empathy as a skill and a practice. It values creativity. It requires interdisciplinary collaboration. Its goal is to meet the needs of humans with meaningful solutions, in a way the very opposite of what a SWOT report, even in its best as its best dressed can be. What I'll talk about today is how human-centered design helped me and students take on a collaborative writing and research project in a new way. All right, so I think we might be to the slide portions of at least my presentation, if anyone has them.
Yeah, I think we'll get the slides up here in a bit, and I
Great.
just to circle back to the Siebel Design Center.
Yeah.
And those folks, and it is, human-centered design, they take that literally. It's kind of design that transcends. We have very particular types in schools and traditions of design, from
Right.
fine arts to engineering to, industrial design, all kinds of things. And it's just, the human-centered design is, it really is, they open the doors to everybody, right? And that their mission is even in the community. I don't know if everybody realizes you could be in the community or whatever and walk in the Siebel Design Center and get a little bit of attention and access to ideas and tools and people.
Yeah, and I'll talk about this in a second. Problems that human-centered design address are meant to be wicked.
Yeah.
Right, and wicked in a very sort of fun way. They're meant to be interdisciplinary in strange ways, to be very hard to define, to be hard to solve, to only, allow for very small interventions because they're so big and complex. So, it's been a fantastic collaboration for us and Siebel, for sure.
The slides are in the US mail,
Yeah, sure.
but they will be here.
Yeah.
Working on it. They're working on. So if you want to kick off, and I think we'll get them in a minute.
Yeah, I think I can start talking about them. So in my classroom, I'm going to talk about the final project, the research paper, the group writing. We all have one of these, right? Depending on how well we sort of described it on our syllabi. We use human-centered design as a process, at least the understand and synthesize spaces of at least Siebel's human-centered design taxonomy, and I'll sort of show that in a second. The human-centered design taxonomy has a few different spaces in it. We sort of stick to the first 2, which map onto things like research and analysis of data, right? That's how we're sort of working with human-centered design as a process. So what I'm asking students to do is identify a space to investigate, to understand the humans and their needs and activities in that space, to synthesize what we learn, and then even to research an audience to deliver that research once we finished collecting it and interpreting it and organizing it. And I call the project, depending on how this goes, I or somebody else invited me to call the project the non-SWOT report. Now I thought that up. Good. That got a good Good reception.
Alliteration.
All right, and the idea is that the previous assignment is forward. Thank you. Could be a little bit rote and formulaic, and we want to, in a way, deconstruct that.
Oh, he doesn't have that. PowerPoint needs to have it.
There we go. Fantastic. Great. So the final project is a not SWOT report. As I said, we sort of spend our time in these understand and synthesize spaces, part of Siebel's taxonomy of human-centered design. The taxonomy goes on to talk about ideation, prototyping, and then implementing solutions. We don't do that in my classroom. It'd be really interesting to see what happened if we did. We sort of stay in these understand and synthesize, something like the research and then analysis of data spaces. And in these spaces, or in this project, I'm asking students to practice empathy and human-centeredness, to find a problem space and identify a location to observe and study and the people and their needs in that problem space, to propose a wicked problem. A wicked problem is almost exactly what you think it would be. Like if we were to just brainstorm what would be wicked about a problem, if we were to call it that. Wicked problems are hard to define and to neatly categorize. They're hard to declare solved. Explanations for wicked problems vary because different people with different points of view describe them differently. There's no test to see if your problem worked. There are only iterations and reiterations. Implementations of solutions are often very small scale because the problems are so wicked and multifaceted. Designers attempting to solve or address a wicked problem are responsible for all the work they do. There's an ethical component. In a way, you're practicing this solution and problem solving along with the people whose needs you are trying to meet. And wicked problems focus on human needs and pain points, something you might learn the second time you teach this that you should reemphasize for students. All right, so I ask students to propose a wicked problem and then research and understand that problem and its human needs, to synthesize the research that they've done in the problem space. And then, and you can see this rather clumsy final bullet, it was clumsy in the classroom too, identify an audience and report a team's work to them in a genre that's appropriate for them. As writers, the audience in the wicked problem, I'm sure some of you who study genre and writing studies, I'm a literature teacher, say, this is kind of a lot of work, Andrew. Why does it just get one bullet? I agree, it should have gotten more bullets, but we ran out of time in my class. All right, that's what the project looks like overall. Here's how we did it. I'm wondering if someone else could advance. Yes, so we're researching as part of this project, and I invited students to explore campus individually or in groups. In this case, we did a couple of days of practicing and modeling field notes, right? The research in human-centered design looks a little ethnographic if you're sort of familiar with ethnography or the taking of field notes. So I'm sort of asking them to come to a space that looked like it could be an interesting problem space, and we all practiced taking field notes together. Later on, I sent them out to look for other problem spaces on campus that they thought might be interesting for them. Once students sort of agree on a problem space, I ask them to sort of find groups where they have sort of like interests or problem spaces or human needs that they want to focus on. And then the class facilitates. Watching is not the most technical term. Watching and identifying users, interviewing, then being in the problem space, that is doing the research. It takes a lot of time to do this, and you really need to, or we really needed to dedicate classroom time and out of classroom time for people to go out into these problem spaces and really be empathic and really take time to do interviews and observations. And then finally, doing these, practicing these kinds of data collections in class was key also. We had to model these somewhat intuitive, but I don't want to say tricky. They're moves to some of this empathy and research work that matter, right? And so practicing them in class took a little bit of time. I also asked students to do lots and lots of reflection activities at the same time they were doing research. Some of the activities include taking field notes, interviewing people at the BIF. It's a business instructional facility, right? The BIF, about what frustrates them or interrupts their study. Some students observed the dining hall and took notes about what students did when they either did or didn't recycle. Lots of students like the camera study, which is a human-centered design approach to gathering data. You're meant to sort of hand somebody a camera and ask them to sort of use it as they move about a space. I didn't want to mess with that kind of privacy in my classroom. I asked students to imagine what it would be like if one of their users walked through that space. So, for example, one group of students took their camera and walked up and down Boneyard Creek, right? They were interested in, I'm not sure what I can't recall the project, something about the way that the plants were sort of designed along Boneyard Creek. They took a camera and walked up and down it. They did a camera study. Collaboratively writing with human-centered design takes place in the research or understand spaces, and also in the synthesize space, what I think if you're in a writing class, you might call outlining and drafting. So human-centered design affords collaboration of all kinds. And for my class, students wrote collaboratively while doing research and while analyzing that research. Reflecting students used a series of human-centered design activities that require opening up their research together, reading it together, taking notes on it together, and then finding themes and patterns in that research. It literally, I think the best way, so even though they're called here story share and capture, saturate and group, and a user timeline, I think the best way to tell you what this is like is to do this. And so Danny, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sort of put you on the spot. Danny and I would both open our computers and we would read one another's research, and we might even read it out loud to one another. And while Danny was reading through his research, I would take notes. And when I read mine, Danny would take notes. And then we would take our notes, usually on Post-it notes. We would take our notes and we would walk over to a wall and start putting them on the wall and start putting them into groups, and then reforming them into groups, and then giving those groups headings, right? Sort of organizing them into patterns. It's a really tactile, really intensive, and really face-to-face way to look at research. And remember, this research is all primary research. It's notes that they've taken out into the field. In synthesized activities, students are sharing their understand activity data. So after they've taken their data and analyzed it and sort of called out or sort of highlighted some themes, it's time for them to start putting it into a narrative form or a cause and effect form or a chronology. And in this case, there are certain HCD activities that help them make a timeline of a user's activities. To tell a story about a composite user, to put a point of view statement together, or a stakeholder map that help them see people's points of view and their needs and their ability to solve a problem. So in short, collaborative writing and human-centered design activities complemented one another really well for us. Students reported, and I'm using reporting as a verb, not as a noun. HCD activities help describe a real problem, and students researched the real humans whose needs are being affected. This kind of research should, I emphasize, should lead students to reporting to a real audience, one you can name. I will just sort of say, you can probably imagine this. So many people wrote to Elon Musk 10 years ago. Do you know what I mean? For their SWOT reports. Elon Musk is not going to read your report that's 3 pages long that you spent. Anyway, so this sorts of research, which is very local and very wicked and very strange and very original, we should be able to find an authentic audience for this. And they did, by the way. So the wickedness of the problem, the creative ways that students have researched it, really should encourage students to also explore a genre's affordances and its social action in a meaningful way. Instead of our report, the students are asking themselves, how in the world can we put this together so that it will be meaningful for somebody when they read it? BTW's focus on audience analysis and genre affordances, I think we spend quite a bit of time on that in the professional writing classroom. It should map really nicely on students finding an authentic audience and a genre that really is socially active or will sort of speak or fit with an audience's expectations. This didn't work. I kind of lack, I sort of said I'm a literature teacher. I sort of lack the knowledge and we lack the time to sort of make this kind of rhetorical genre theory moment work. That's, I think, what should really be happening. And also students, as I said, we kind of ran out of time. I will say that challenging students' choices, right, if they were to make, thank you, Jody Shipka, statement of goals and choices, I would challenge them, right, on the kinds of choices they were making. Why did you pick a pamphlet? Why did you pick an Instagram sort of campaign? Why did you pick a SWOT report? Just challenging them and asking them to tell me why they made those choices, I think was very meaningful for us, even if they did not produce the most sort of sterling pamphlets or Instagram campaigns. All right, how am I doing on time? I'll just sort of say quickly, students' genre choices, I thought were great. You know, everybody's like, we're going to do a pamphlet, and they were so happy about choosing a pamphlet. And then they did pamphlets that weren't fantastic. Also, we and my students realized in a second semester that people don't read pamphlets, and we shouldn't. As a genre execution was not super, right? Like we ran out of time, and I don't know if I'm great at sort of teaching those, although their choices about the genres were great. They did not do group agreements. This work came at the expense of teaching things like project management, sort of the ethics of working in a group. We just sort of ran out of time. Although, however, the collaborative ethos was excellent in this project. I think we all know that when students are working on something that's really meaningful to them, they can, whose results they can see, their affect, right, and their work takes on a lot of energy. Their attention and task management on this was very, very good. As I said, I think it was very meaningful and it was very new to them. And they did unique original research and thinking. I think HCD really helped us meet that goal in the BTW classroom. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to take questions now or later, or turn it over to my colleagues who want to present.
A couple of questions or from the panel, or and we've got online folks as well.
Question.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about activities that you use to practice empathy in the class project?
Yeah, I will say this, and I can send this to everybody. The D School, the design school in Stanford, has a document called the D School Bootleg, which has, and I'll sort of name the activity, Getting into a Beginner's Mindset, I think is the first one. And the idea is to take yourself back to a time before you had observed any of these activities. Does that make sense? So, and I actually ask students to do that before every research activity. First, get into a beginner's mindset, then do an interview. So, yeah. And otherwise, for empathy means understanding the humans in this space. So most primary research activities would count for empathy. In this case, it's a slightly different definition. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks. That's a good question.
I have a question. How did you come to the wicked problem terminology? I think it's I really like it. I think it's intuitive. I think it's authentic and yeah, I think it's great.
As far as I know, it's Richard Marbeck's. Richard Marbeck brought the terminology wicked problems to writing studies, I think in 2009, and said, listen, all writing problems are wicked problems in one way or another. That alignment hasn't come to fruition. It hasn't sort of worked out. You know what I mean? Like we're still working on aligning those two things. But Richard Marbeck is, I think, the origin for writing studies.
Thank you so
Thank you.
And more to follow on the panel, because I've got thoughts buzzing. I love the ethnography and the collaborative, and that fits into the BNTW as a professions to begin with, and then you later on human-centered design and qualitative and ethnographic and original research. So I'm thinking that's a good thing, right?
We're excited,
very human. I mean, it's human at all those levels and collaborative. So that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. The short answer is yes. I mean, I think there's a lot more to do. There are other things we want to do in BTW 250 that we had to compromise on, I think. I think in the works is another BTW class with a different number that would be human-centered design at BTW.
Well, and I'm just from your own comments and where you're doing the great thing, which we're saying, right? You're iterating a course, right? We know you liked a lot of stuff, and let's make that better and fix in another class. So you're evolving based on what you're learning, and those are always the best classes and the best approaches. Yes. So thank you so much. Thank you. Dan.
It's my turn, huh? Okay, so my talk is going to be a lot more theoretical, since I'm not a teacher, but I think hopefully you'll find it interesting. It's an interesting project to put together. So the title of my talk is Useful and Iterative Prompt Engineering. I'm hosting a workshop next week with that title that's more hands-on, but this is just more kind of the theory behind it. Get started here. So I already did my intro, right? I will point out that I also have an MLIS from this school, so I graduated in 2011 from the library school here, which is related because there's an information literacy component to prompt engineering that comes into play a little later on in my slides. But yeah, most of the work that I do here on campus is related to online teaching platforms like Canvas, formerly Compass. I also do some stuff with streaming media, Kaltura, pretty much a lot of consulting and training with educational technology. So prompt engineering is the process of writing, refining, and optimizing inputs. It's not on there, it's through iteration usually, but we're here to talk about the writing part, because this is a writing type of talk, right? So really a better kind of title for my talk would probably be prompt engineering in the writing classroom. Having trouble advancing the slides here. Let's see. Am I supposed to point it over? Oh, there it goes. All right, prompt, there it is. The old typewriter. Okay. All right. So how did I get involved in this whole this is how I got interested in this topic. So this topic of like prompt engineering in the writing classroom came from this article that I read within the last year. It's called Post-Process but Not Post-Writing, Large Language Models and a Future for Composition Pedagogy. It was published in 2023, which is pretty soon after large language models were released. So some of the ideas in here are a little dated, but there's also some unique ideas that I found in this particular article that I thought were very interesting and worthy of kind of delving into and thinking about a little bit more. So
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. So what do LLMs do? So one of the things that Graham says LLMs are really good at is that since they use probability to determine output, they're really great at genre signaling, whatever, right? So something that someone would never do is just take a chunk of text, paste it into a chatbot and just hit enter. The first thing it'll usually do is tell you the genre that the writing is in. Why is that important? Well, in writing, we were talking a little bit about like genre awareness, just understanding genre. So innately, LLMs are pretty good because they use probability and algorithms to detect genre. So they could be instructive for that. But Scott Graham's main thesis is that because LLMs are really good at this, forming a good prompt is a writing related skill and therefore should be in the writing classroom.
Next slide.
So the Luddites in the room are going to like this. He says that the history of writing practice is a moral panic about technology. When I read that, I thought, well, I really like this guy. I work with central IT. I kind of see this all the time. I would actually qualify this nowadays. I don't think the moral panic about technology is unique to the writing classroom. I think I see it across disciplines. Whenever there's any new technology, and all fields in education or higher ed tend to have a little moral panic about it. And he brings up this Lunsford and Lunsford study from 2008, which is Mistakes Are a Fact of Life. This was required reading in a couple of courses I took in my graduate studies at Eastern. But basically, it just shows that even though there have been all these technological innovations over the past 100 years, he cites like the eraser for the pencil, the typewriter, the word processor, grammar check, spell check, these type of things. There hasn't really been a measurable decline in the quality of student writing in that time, which is pretty fascinating. But also you have to keep in mind that study was in 2008. So next slide, please. So he argues that technology prohibition doesn't work. And I've seen this in other frameworks for pedagogy, similar to like new media pedagogy. There are scholars that argue, well, if students are writing on Twitter, we should teach them how to use Twitter. If students are writing blogs, we should teach them how to use blogs, etc. But he says that if we're not teaching students about the tools that they're using, then we're going to be doing them a disservice. He says that that LLMs and AI are a writing technology, and I'm not sure. I'm in complete agreement with him there. I think AI kind of circumvents the writing process. I think it's more of like a productivity tool, right? You could tell a chatbot to write a 5-paragraph essay in seconds, but you can also tell it to break down a calculus problem and tell you the steps to solve it. So it can do all different types of things and it can do it for you rather quickly. So, yeah, next slide, please. So he grounds his theories in a post-process pedagogy. I never studied post-process pedagogy in my graduate program, but I did study process pedagogy, and they're very similar. It's like a recursive dialogic process, right? You start with this like rough draft, and then you start to outline or whatever, you work with it, you organize your ideas, and then you present your ideas to a reviewer, a peer reviewer. You maybe imagine an audience, use AI, I suppose. You can talk to a mentor or a teacher, but then you take the feedback, you incorporate it, you revise, and then eventually through several iterations, you have polished prose that is ready to publish. So that's kind of like the post-process pedagogy model that he outlines in this article. And if you advance the slide here, you can kind of see it. So this is his diagram, right? You draft, you organize, peer review, revise from ideation to publishing, right? This is the iterative, recursive, dialogic steps. And if you go forward to one more slide, you'll see that the prompting process is very similar. So there's this kind of mirroring effect, right? So process pedagogy and the iterative process of working with a AI chatbot are kind of the same, right? You go to prompt, you curate, you fact check, and revise. Definitely put an asterisk on fact check, because I think that fact checking is the academic part of using LLMs that I think other models tend to miss. Please advance the slide. So Graham concludes that writing studies should be taking the lead on developing prompt engineering curriculum. That's what he says, and I, tend to agree with him. But the way that I formulate it is a little bit different. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I think of it as like library and information literacy in one hand, and then you got the writing classroom in another. And I think these two things have overlapped to some extent, well before AI and chatbots have been on the scene. I think of it more like a rhetorical purpose of ethos, right? We use library research to establish credibility. So you need to have library and information literacy to go with your writing skills in order to establish yourself as a writer. So this overlap has always been there. And so in that overlap, we just have to squeeze in some room in how to write good prompts. So go ahead and forward the slides. So I reached out to Dr. Graham. He's a lecturer at UT Austin a couple weeks ago as I was preparing for this talk. And I asked him if he was putting any of his theoretical ideas to work, and he hasn't really done it to a really far extent. However, he did point me into the direction of the digital learning lab at UC Irvine, who has done some AI pedagogy work in the classroom, so I would look at them. And then there's this AI and how we teach writing Substack that is really good. I don't know if anyone on the panel's heard of that, but that's by Dr. Anit, and she's at the University of Pittsburgh. So let's see here. So go to the next slide, please. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments about my little lightning talk there.
Questions from the house or online?
Have you had a whole lot of success? Have you tried any of this yourself?
No, it's pretty much all theoretical. I've in constructing my own curriculum for teaching prompt engineering, and like I said, I'm doing a workshop next week on Tuesday about this. A lot of the iterative functions of prompt engineering are kind of built into the tool. Like if you go to Copilot, for example, they'll have primed the interface with some questions that you can ask it right out of the gate. So it does a really good job of training the user already on how to use the chatbot, which I think could be good for a beginner. But my whole the way that I'm thinking about it now, and my opinions on this will change almost daily, but I think that AI is good for becoming conversant on a topic in a very short period of time. But if you're going to do a deep dive into any topic, of course you're going to want to pair it with some kind of library research. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I wonder if you use the AI to help you with any of your assignments?
No, I would never do that.
A writer's block or an idea or
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think when we're talking about how to teach students how to use AI, the thing about AI is it presents as authoritative, whether it's authoritative or not, and we have to be mindful of that. This is discussed in some of the literature I linked to, but like a lot of the consensus in the community seems to be now, it's like students need to be taught to write first and ideate on their own first before they even talk to AI. So like the way that I write when I'm writing is it's like usually I'll have a finished draft before I even show it to AI. And even then it's seductive to like take their suggestions into account. And I have to remember that to not be persuaded by that, because they do such a good job of breaking the whole thing down, and then you're like, okay, well, I don't even know if I should listen to it. Go ahead.
When you get feedback, how often does it actually tell you that your stuff's not good? I'm sure you're giving it all good stuff, mind you, but
Yeah.
because I personally found no matter what I give it, that's a great idea. That's fantastic. And so it loses immense amounts of credibility for me, and that I know no matter what I give it, it's gonna say top notch.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it, so that there's this concept of like role-based feedback.
Mhm.
And you could, so yeah, there's like this sycophancy problem, right? Where
Yes.
they're like the AI chatbot is like kissing your ass, and like you're just trying to get like real feedback. But if you ask for role-based feedback, you can say, give me feedback as if you're my harshest critic, for example, and then it shouldn't do that as much.
Dan, when you're talking about the college writing classroom, are you thinking specifically about like first year composition courses, or any class that includes writing, or classes under the umbrella of the field of writing studies, or?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that too much. But yeah, mostly, yeah, first year comp courses is kind of what I've been thinking of. But I also understand that like there's the writing across the curriculum movement could also benefit with this type of framework, just because there's a certain STEM flavor to using AI, so I think it could be applied elsewhere.
Yeah, less, I mean, a thought for me, just based on yesterday's panel, and Michael Curtin was sitting, the seat you're sitting in, he's tech services, and like I said, he's an artist and a sketcher, and he's helping with tech, and so he's got a complicated relationship to AI. But he coined a phrase that the whole panel loved, and we used, it was the easy button. So the thing everybody, even the person that's guilty of it admits, so the easy button is when you prompt AI once, hit the easy button, and you take what it gave you and you use it without much thought or reflection. But you're talking about prompt, and then the panel was very eloquent about how they like to use AI in dialogue, conversation, debate, month-long conversations, back and forth, and prompting AI to be tough on me. Which is a whole different thing, right? Because there's a lot more human in there because you're iterating. I think that the article you chose that was getting onto this idea of this iterative back, which is human back and forth and dialogue and conversation and debate. So I think that, I mean, that's right. When you say engineering, you're not doing the easy button, no single prompt. It's all based on this idea of a little more of a back and forth, which gets us back to iterative, at least half human. And then with AI is sucking up a lot of human stuff in interesting ways, but it's pulling from human utterances and things. So, but that's your idea of engineering, that it's more than just a 5-second engagement,
right? And yeah, I don't really like the term prompt engineering because I don't think that's exactly what's happening. I do think there's more of a dialogue going on, and I think when you say prompt engineering, people don't really have a good concept of what it is, and it could mean different things to different people.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
There was a question from a participant on Zoom. How do you grapple with the issue of the cognitive debt associated with using AI for writing? Do you talk about that with students?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I'm not a teacher, so this is just like a theoretical approach. But I don't really have any thoughts. Like I would ask kind of to extrapolate a little bit more about what he means by what the person means by cognitive debt, and I'd like to learn more a little bit about what they mean. So before I answer.
All right, well, thanks. Well, cognitive debt, the cognitive load, Prashemik, if we get a little more on that, we can come back to that later. And I know our third lightning round presenter, Danny?
Sure. May I have the remote, which doesn't.
Well, I think we're
work?
actually,
All right.
we're at,
Where is the receiver for this? Where should I be pointing with?
It's not over there.
should I make a?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be in the TV area. Is it?
Might be the batteries too.
I think we're going old school, maybe.
Those things drain pretty quick. Oh. We'll have to do it old school.
Let's go human. We'll say.
Is your keyboard wireless by any chance?
Keyboard?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I mean, if it's wireless, like, you could just pass it to me.
Could, but I think I'll need it to,
Yeah,
Oh, to
he's-
chat with the people on that, sorry, okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to take tools. Alright, well, in
Next
that
slide,
case-
please.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Danny. As you can see, my pronouns are they, them. And this is thinking about AI from the perspective of a creative writer and a reader of creative writing. I also teach in the English program. I teach in first year composition and all that, but I was trying to get away from that for this speech because it's a big ball of wax and we can talk about that and the panel discussion as well. And I'm also a huge nerd, as my choice of art will demonstrate. We can go ahead to the next slide. This is a quote from Chuck Wendig, who's a sci-fi writer. I don't entirely agree with him. This sort of like speaks to that like push of the button composition, easy button that was mentioned earlier. He said, the allure of AI entices those people who fetishize ideas but dismiss the work. They're the people who tell writers, I'll give you the idea, then you write it and we'll split the profits. For them, the vision is everything and the work is just an annoying obstacle, but the work is everything. The work is how a thing happens, where it's made, where skills put to work. AI and creativity is for the people who have no skill, no work, no effort, no effort. And I apologize. You mentioned earlier that you're going to have a problem with Luddites.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, all right. Or maybe that's a disagree with you, but we also talk about very different things. You know, like I'm talking about creative writing. So we can move to the next slide. So just to talk about myself, like these are very much my own thoughts. It's my own lived experience. I'm not saying this to present guidance or to give any kind of argument. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. And I also want to mention that I think it's a George Carlin quote that inside every cynic is a disappointed romantic. And I spent literally thousands of hours of my life, to my great regret, like trying to make AI write good stories. And you know, ever since like before ChatGPT came out, back when it was just like GPT-2 and like really janky, like sad, like online database. No, I don't know what word I'm looking for. Like the playground feature on like the old OpenAI website. But like since I was a kid, you know, and I read the never-ending story, I've been obsessed with this idea of you know, a book that already has every conceivable story in it, and how wonderful it would be as a reader to be able to, you know, push a button and then get any story that I can imagine. And I know that this is the promise. Lots of websites out there promise, you know, we will write you a novel like that's deep and intricate and beautiful. The push of a button, and also like if you sign up for a yearly subscription. But none of them are there yet, and I think that's where a lot of my cynicism and my sadness comes from, and also of course my love for human creativity. We can move on to the next slide. So yeah, I'm sort of thinking about this from two perspectives. The main one is how AI affects writers, and I'm speaking specifically about creative writers, writers of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, screenplays, etc. And as people have mentioned, generative AI quickly produces professional seeming texts. You can create something which seems polished with minimal time and human effort. I know, like, you know, you can be iterative and you can have lots of prompt engineering and whatnot. And I'm not trying to make it sound like it's easy, but you know, it's perhaps there is a tendency to, you know, choose path of least resistance. I also want to mention, you know, like we live in a capitalist system and we're, you know, like we value quote unquote efficiency and productivity. And I've had students in my creative writing classes say, oh, like AI is wonderful. I can write so many more stories now. I can write 20, you know, like short stories in a day. And I'm thinking like, but yeah, so, and in my experience with, you know, like AI, which has been almost, I mean, largely in fiction and poetry, I don't see a lot of artistic development. I don't see a lot of depth, don't see a lot of human complexity, beauty. And then my second interest is very much in how AI affects readers. Me, speaking specifically about myself, that now I pick up anything written after 2022 and I'm like scanning for like phrases that I know from AI, the air was thick with, or, overuse of M dashes, or, the word testament to, or things like that. We can move to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier, and I'm using several studies, and I've got lots of links and everything. And but there was a study in Science Advances that found that they did an experiment having people write stories, and they found that 88.4% of study participants who were given the chance to use AI to help them write the story, used the AI, and those who who did, were actually scoring higher in terms of originality, creativity, etc. And then also there's another story or study in Nature, which found that non-experts, so people who don't identify as poets, identified AI poets as they were given like a mix of poems written by AI and poems written by people, and they had an accuracy of 46%, which is less than 50-50. So if they would have been flipping a coin, they would have been more accurate than this. And so they actually preferred the AI poems. But I do want to mention that the stories that they were writing in this first experiment were 8 sentences long, and also there were people who were brought in for a study. They didn't have intrinsic motivation to write stories. And in the second experiment, they chose 10 poets to give AI versions of, and then also like real versions of. And only one poet is still alive of those 10 poets, and almost all of them were before the 20th century. They had Geoffrey Chaucer in there. And I don't think if you brought in people from the street and gave them a poem by Geoffrey Chaucer, I don't think that most people would feel like they connect well with that. No offense to Chaucer. I wrote my undergrad thesis about the Canterbury Tales. And in the story example, there's also this threat, and this is something that I'm going to go into in more detail, that the stories were more semantically similar, the ones that were written by AI. Like even though like humans who were reading them said that, yes, they're more original, they're more creative, when you looked at the sum of all the stories that were written for the experiment, they tended to be very similar to each other, the ones that were written by AI. And this is kind of one of my worries, but I'll get to this. As far as the poetry study goes, there was a quote from the article that said, "The simplicity of AI-generated poems may be easier for non-experts to understand, leading them to prefer AI-generated poetry and misinterpret the complexity of human poems as incoherence generated by AI." So this might be the reason that a lot of people were identifying things written by humans as AI-generated, because they didn't understand it at first glance. And so we can talk about the cognitive effects of AI as well. We can go on to the next slide. Oh yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. That's I don't have to keep asking people to do it. I can do it myself. So there was a study that pitted ChatGPT against humans who were hired through the Mechanical Turk, which is an online website where you can just hire people to do things for you. And what they found through this study, which is similar to the previous study about writing stories, is that the ChatGPT stories tended to be more simplistic. They tended to have these moral resolutions. The characters, that were more limited. They seemed to have a more narrow skill set and imaginative scope. They were also less colorful and playful, which is interesting. It seems like a very sort of a human response. And also, there's another study that said, and I'll just go ahead and quote from them, that large language models produce linguistically and stylistically more complex stories than humans, as indicated by higher lexical and syntactic complexity and lower readability results. I don't know if that's a good thing, but but the human stories tend to be consistently more novel, show more surprise, and have more diversity in syntax and the lexicon that they use. Yes, it works. So and we can go into more detail about what I mean by attention mechanism, but human brains make connections. As we're writing, there's a rule in creative writing that says, you should write the story or the poem or whatever first, and then look for themes. And then as you write further drafts, because you'll automatically have themes in your story without even realizing it. And the AI can't really do that, just like, the Terminator can't write. It gets stuck, and even the stories that it writes and the poems tend to fall into these like very likely patterns just because of the way that they work. So I also wanted to mention that there was this recent study which kind of went viral, where people found that the use of sort of ChatGPT's favorite words is increasing. So they studied both articles and also podcasts, conversation podcasts, because they brought in podcasts because they wanted to just hear what normal people sound like. And they found that, words like, swift, meticulous, delve, testament, these words are being used more and more, even in conversation, not just in academic writing, but also both. But also that we're trying to use words that don't show up in ChatGPT writing less. And I don't know about you, but I had kind of a nervous breakdown when I read this. It's like, oh my gosh, it's affecting me. And so this is also one of my fears about like, well, if creative writers, the people who, in many cases are, sharing our collective dreams, are using AI, then we're starting to lose our own voices. And this is a wonderful poem that I think many of us have probably read because it's also made the rounds on social media. And I know that my talk isn't about classrooms. This is about creative writing, but I think that it very much speaks to the same idea that I'm reaching for, which is the idea of doing the work. And this poem is called For a Student Who Used AI to Write a Paper by Joseph Pisano. Now I let it fall back in the grasses. I hear you. I know this life is hard now. I know your days are precious on this earth. But what are you trying to be free of? The living? The miraculous task of it? Love is for the ones who love the work. And I'm not going to analyze this poem. We can move on. So on this subject of doing the work, I also quote from Anne Lamott from Bird by Bird. I love her. And so the struggle and wanting to write is like I did a search online for like who's the first person who said, like many people want to have written, but they don't want to write, or even like people saying, I want to have written, but I hate the process of writing, which is, like a recurring theme in creative writers and writers in general, I feel. But, writing itself is tedious. It's full of self-doubt. There's suffering involved in it. And so I had this wonderful quote from Anne Lamott. This is from her chapter, Shitty First Drafts. Very few writers really know what they are doing until they've done it, nor do they go about their business feeling dewy and thrilled. They do not type a few stiff warm-up sentences and then find themselves bounding along like huskies across the snow. One writer I know tells me that he sits down every morning and says to himself nicely, and I apologize, content warning here, it's not like you don't have a choice because you do. You can either type or kill yourself. We all often feel like we are pulling teeth, even those writers whose prose ends up being the most natural and fluid. The right words and sentences that do not come pouring out like ticker tape most of the time, unless you push enter on ChatGPT or DeepSeek or something, in which case it literally does come out like ticker tape. You can watch it generate the stream token by token. Although I do want to mention, in the interest of having a conversation, like I do know that this criticism, like I had to suffer, writing is suffering, there's a famous quote, like writing is easy, you just have to open a vein, bleed on the page. This has kind of that, like, well, when I was a kid, I walked both ways through the snow uphill, and now you have to suffer as well. And also, like, we're celebrating effort, struggle, but that's privileging people who have the resources to be able to devote the time to struggle and to do things like that. And, there's intersection with gatekeeping, intersection with taste. So we can talk more about that in our panel. I don't want to use up too much time right now. So yeah, I'll move on. So my fear, like I've mentioned, that people who have the chance to use generative AI do that, and again, like I'm fully aware that this is one of those back in my day type things, then I'm worried that we'll lose that amateur and sloppy work, which is made for the sheer joy of creating. I'm not even talking about just like writing now, but also like art and stuff like that. If I can go to ChatGPT with Dolly or to, like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion and have it create, my fan art for me. What happens to all the bad Sonic the Hedgehog fan art on DeviantArt or Tumblr, like that joy of like a 12-year-old with like their notebook, like scribbling down a story. Is that lost? I feel like, that's the start of a lifelong writer. And I love this metaphor of like, it's like bringing a forklift into a gym. Yes, you can lift thousands of pounds and go and tell people about your very impressive PB on your benches, but I don't know if that's going to make you a better writer. So yeah, so as a reader, I also have this fear, like I'm reading these things and I'm recognizing these patterns. And this is whether I'm on AO3 reading fan fiction or even reading published work. I start to see a lot of these, like the air was thick with, and the air is echoing, or voice was barely above whispered, like these phrases that you get very used to if you look at a lot of creative writing. And I start to become paranoid, and I realize that like I don't have that initial joy of like, I'm just so glad to pick up a piece of writing. I first have to sort of convince myself that this was written by a human. And I miss that. I miss that uncomplicated moment. Moving on, like some people might say, like, don't worry about it. I can't, like, it's in my head now. Like, and I know that AI doesn't reward my emotional investment. Like, with a human, when I'm reading it, I know that there's depth here. I know that this is created by human subconscious, which is making connections and creating, just these weird twists and movements, which I mean, AI can be weird, don't get me wrong. But there's no purpose to it. There's no human experience behind it, other than maybe we can make the argument like there's the aggregation of all human experience, but we can have that debate if you want to. And it's the difference between a photograph of a lake and the lake itself. So my next slide is those things, like the picture on the right might look nice, but if you look closely, you realize that there's like quote unquote trees that don't actually connect to anything on the ground, or like there's rocks that like sort of just end, or it doesn't reward long contemplation. There's no like William Wordsworth sitting and contemplating your field of daffodils of AI, because the longer you look at it, the less you enjoy it, or at least this is my opinion. So this is an example of an AI's written story, the end of it. There's an old lighthouse keeper called Elias, and he rescues somebody from the ocean. And the sailor thanks him and says, "He saved my life." Elias nodded simply. "No," Elias replied with a faint smile, eyes firmly fixed on the ocean's distant horizon. "You saved mine." Um, I don't have to go into why that's terrible. Or like sentences like this, like the city never truly sleeps. Even now, in the mid-afternoon, the streets bustle with activity. Oh well, I'm glad to know the streets aren't deserted in the mid-afternoon. I know that there's exceptional cases, and I wanted to mention these. So there are writers who explicitly are experimenting with generative AI, like Bahini Farah with this beautiful essay about her dead sister called Ghost that she's writing with GPT-3, or Liliane Yvonne Bertram, who's here, used AI to create poetry in the style of different dead poets, comparing those to sort of like generic AI written poems, and that's also brilliant. I also don't want to like get in the way of people's excitement or kind of creative expression that you can get from working with AI. And I know that, we've been, as creative writers, we do all sorts of things with, like you get ideas from newspapers or from like, pick a random sentence out of a book, and AI also is part of that. But yeah, so I don't have any rules. I don't have any answers. I really just wanted to share this stuff. I sometimes also eat food with high fructose corn syrup in it. So yeah, so I'm the designated Luddite, and if you want to continue the conversation, then there's my email address, davidnicosh@illinois.edu. I very much welcome people to reach out and talk to me, or send me your favorite or least favorite AI written stories. All right, thank you. I'm sorry if I went over time.
No, thank you so much. Well, we'll do time for some questions and responses to Danny, and then we'll take a 3-5 minute break as we transition to the panel. But yeah, questions for Danny about Sonic the Hedgehog or anything else?
I'm revealing my age when I talk about deviant. Go ahead.
No, so maybe pay a little bit devil's advocate 'cause it's fun. So you had cited some sources in there that talked about how people prefer the AI text more so than the human text, even though they acknowledge that it still was kind of very similar. So what would you say to people who say like, isn't like, what would you say in terms of, well, maybe more of a comment. So how do you think about people who like say that we just like familiarity and that AI is just presenting what we already like? Like especially Hollywood and the concerns about like AI writing scripts and whatnot, and not in battle, but like but are we just creating more stuff that's like ourselves? And then you can think back to also kind of related to there was I can't remember what year it was, thinking like 2017 when when an AI generated picture won that big art award, and that created a bunch of like controversy of like, can AI win an art award or what?
Yeah. I absolutely agree when you say like it's familiar. I mean, there's a reason that the romance novel genre like is the most sold like genre of like by copies sold. Like people like familiarity. They like knowing that they're going to get together on page 200 or whatever. And I think that especially when you're an amateur reader, then having something which doesn't challenge you makes you feel safe. But then the question is like, do we want to feel safe as readers? And sometimes we do, like, let's be honest. I think we all like have been asked by Netflix if we want to keep watching as we're watching our K-dramas or something. These very sort of familiar things that, we know that there's going to be like tears and drama and ups and downs and whatnot, but we go back to it. But I think that writing should challenge you. Like I brought in like a poem that sort of exemplifies this. This is a poem by Margaret Atwood, and the poem simply goes, "You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye." And ChatGPT will never be able to write that because the surprise of it is what makes the poem possible. I say that now. I don't know. GPT-5 is cooking, as they say. So we'll see. Maybe I'll have to eat these words.
Yeah, thank you for that, by the way. That's fantastic. The research is convincing, number one. The affect is convincing. Have you talked like this to your students?
Yeah.
How's it go? Like, I would like you to come talk to my students like this, by the way. But
Genuine.
yeah, like, how does it go? Like, does it move them? Do you see results? Do they change
Some yes and some no.
How do they react?
I'm teaching a class right now. I taught it last semester. I'm teaching it again this semester, which is specifically about the use of generative AI in writing. And it's Red 233. And something that I found really shocking is that a lot of my students came in very, very anti-AI. And here I am, like the Luddite, trying to convince them, no, at least try it. Like you should at least see what it can do. You should at least get familiar with it because we're studying writing, and this is the moment of, this is the topic in writing studies right now, whether we like it or not. And so we have these conversations, and I really feel that a large part of this, the struggle, I don't know if that's the right word for it. I feel like, again, sort of suggests an antagonistic relationship of, or maybe the challenge of being a writing teacher is demonstrating that writing has purpose, which is personal. Yeah. And it's not about, like, I'm not asking you to write essays for me because there's something in me which is longing for an essay. Although that's also true, and I want to show my students that I love the writing and I care about it. But also that, like, writing is something that you yourself can be invested in and get something out of, and that process is something which you can get something from. And some, are convinced and some aren't. And I think that also goes back, and I think that we need to come to a different place of empathy. Like, what is the student's purpose in the classroom? I think, I, have sort of come from a long line of people who, care about a sort of liberal arts education and the idea of, humanism and the humanities. But there is a very real, tangible benefit to having a university education,
Yeah.
to which a composition class can be a stepping stone. And for somebody, like, say for example, and I don't want to like stereotype or anything like that, but somebody who knows that they'll have a markedly different income, and whether or not they have a college degree, which can help, improve their life, their lived experience. To tell somebody like that, no, like this is something that you can struggle through so that your soul can be enlightened, is, that puts me in an uncomfortable position personally. Anyway, you can begin that conversation, but that's my answer. Thanks. It's not in brief, but briefish.
Thanks so much. Well, let's take a quick 5-minute break and we'll come back over this commercial break for an exciting panel and continue. So thanks, everybody.
Enjoyed all of the presentations.
Well, thanks for coming back and, that's the lightning rounds are great. I think they seeded a lot of ideas and thoughts and crosstalk and cerebral fireworks for me. And on the questions, I think the panel helped generate questions and we had some conversation before and like we've said, this is the topic of the day and a lot of all the disciplines, right? But we're kind of going back, taking a step back here because with the first question, we're going back to what everybody's talking about all the time, and it seems a little redundant now, but the idea that AI has really put us in, especially in writing and academia, students are portrayed as cheaters or savvy technologists out for an easy A. Teachers might be portrayed in roles like the gotcha instructor, policing student work. Many writing assignments can also be dull and formulaic and not much effort. Much like the emergence of word processing or of the internet, are we at a new moment to conceive of writing assignment, design, and pedagogy, rather than turning back to the blue book? What opportunities do panelists see for revitalizing that student-teacher writing triad? And we're going to start with Carolyn, since you guys didn't get a lightning round, and you are some serious practitioners, but I thought both of you maybe just weigh on that, and we'll go to Dan.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, I drafted this question, and one of the things that was in the back of my mind was, I graduated high school in 2000 and came up and did my master's in like the early 2000s, and I did my work on plagiarism, which at that time was copy and paste, internet plagiarism, paper mills. And I was really curious about how students understood the concept of plagiarism and this conversation that was playing out at that time with teachers in the gotcha role of hunting for those copy and paste felicities rather than student engagement with the work. So I'm reminded also, Dan, I think you said this, right? Like the history of writing is a history of moral panic against the technologies that arise. And I feel like I'm just seeing those same conversations play out again when so many teachers are feeling themselves put in this mindset of surveillance work they don't want to be.
It's been going on for a while, but in between
Speakers on, and we might have somebody on the Zoom call.
Yeah.
Mute at will.
There we go. So I think that a lot of instructors are feeling that they have to be wearing these sort of surveillance glasses, even if they don't want to find themselves in that role. And I think it also leads to additional labor for teachers, and it also minimizes student engagement, right? This narrative that all students are out there as cheaters, they just want to hit the easy button and be done with it. And I really think that we see so many students in the writers workshop and our writing classes where students are engaged in the work and they want to be challenged to do writing that is meaningful to them in their disciplines and meaningful to them in their personal lives. And so I'm hopeful that rather than replaying the same sort of, like let's catch these students who are trying to trick us and get out of doing the work kind of narrative, I'm hopeful that instead we can say, let's talk to my students and express to them, our goals as writers and why we engage in the work and what we can do with this, and try to be creative in some of the assignments that we give our students to prompt that meaningful engagement. And students do want that. Like, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about the Meaningful Writing Project, which is a study that came out a few years ago, Yodache, Geller, and Lerner, and it talks with students who are exiting seniors about their most meaningful writing projects. And they really do want these experiences where they are given a problem to solve or something that is personally meaningful that they can reflect with, engage with, something that they see as giving them the skills and the knowledge base of their careers. And so I think that we're disservicing ourselves and writing studies as a discipline if we're not leaning into this as an opportunity for those meaningful engagements with writing and talking with students about the work that we do. So that's my initial thinking on this.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I definitely think like the policing is definitely an issue when we think about like how that kind of goes back to like the period of practices of like grammar and, you know, like making the paper bleed type of mindset. And so I think like that's kind of reductive in a lot of ways and then tends to target certain type of students in those regards. And so I think we've seen that with some stories of like across the country, certain universities that have cases where students have to go to the dean of the university to be able to fight against them not actually using the technology to be able to not fail. So I feel like we don't want students to be afraid to write. And I feel like the policing of the AI is going to make students afraid to write something because because there's a bunch of false positives and they're going to be afraid to like engage in that space. I think a way to think about what writing may look like in the future, I think like giving students more agency in the things that they write or how they tackle the problems and allowing that like kind of moments where they can have play with it, and not being maybe so prescriptive. Because being in a writer's workshop, I've definitely seen assignments for certain classes that are very like stringent at the type of stuff that they have that students have to meet. And sometimes I think that kind of then creates spaces where students can then just take that and then put that into ChatGPT and have it kind of spit that back out when it's so prescriptive. So I think about how can we make writing assignments that allow students to kind of find their way within it, but still meets the goals and the learning outcomes for the class. That allows them to, learn, but also feel like what they're doing, they have a say in what they're doing or have more active role in, and is more of active learning instead of passive, where they're not just checking boxes, but they're creating.
Oh yeah, I wanted to say that like this is something that we're thinking about in the rhetoric program right now. We rewrote our rhetoric 105 assignments with this in mind. Like for example, we used to have an assignment which was the source analysis, which very much sort of was the kind of essay that you're talking about. Like pick two sources and like talk about their the author and the purpose and the audience and ethos, logos, pathos, and that was very much the sort of essay that I think a lot of students would come into saying, well, this feels very generic. I don't feel invested in this. This seems like the kind of thing ChatGPT would do well, so I'll just ask ChatGPT to do this for me. And we've changed that into a research narrative, which looks much more at, okay, walk me through your process as you're doing the research. Where are you interested? What are you finding? What are you reading? And what are you thinking as you're reading it? Like, what is reading this like sort of inspire in you, or like tell me about your struggles as you're reading this, and that sort of thing. Hopefully, and we'll see. Like we're piloting it in the fall. So take Grant 105. And hopefully, like this will be something which focuses much more on the process and the writer, the student, rather than on some sort of like I need to be the expert and tell me all about the logos and the ethos of this piece.
No, I love that, and I mean, buried in there is, the thing that, for many years it was true even before AI, but is it personal to the student, right? And it's what I did last summer, but that can also be what's your future career? What do you care about this wicked problem or this issue in the world? So it's personal and then process. So there's two P's in there, the personal and then the process. And I think with the AI and the human, it's always, if we can, the student, if you can, and the students, when we talk to undergrads about AI, they will say, well, I feel like I need to go through the work or the process. They'll use that same language of there's a journey, and if I skip the journey, I know I'm kind of cheating myself. So I love that. Gentlemen, any thoughts on?
I actually had a question to ask Dan about this. Sorry, Dan, you might not want to answer this question. Is prompting AI, is there a way to have that be a meaningful writing project? Is there play involved in that recursive, that iterative process? In the way that I think some other folks are talking about from, I guess, the other side of that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fun to have. Just the side conversation I was having on like between you're switching over, and this gentleman is what is writing science fiction, right, with using prompts. And he's having his prompts kind of talk to his chatbots, and it's kind of like this recursive process that I was talking about in a way that I'm surprised, but also just like I understand, like really, of course someone would do something like this. And he's playing, so it is like, I mean, is this a personal project, right? Yeah. So I mean I mean, that's a good reason to write, if you ask me, if you're bored, why not do that kind of writing? It's fun.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does a little bit, yeah, and I guess I'm trying to bridge Dan and Danny's very different approaches here. I'm wondering if that's sort of possible. I just thought I might ask. Like, I wonder if there's an assignment out there that goes that
Yeah.
satisfies us as teachers are sort of yearning to see students struggle in a good way, I think, right?
I think giving students some freedom to choose
Yeah.
those projects. I don't think it's smart to be the teacher telling them that you have to do this project with AI.
Yeah.
But if a student has an idea, like, oh, I have an idea of something I can do with AI, and like maybe having a conference with a student talking about what those,
Right.
what those deliverables are, maybe that would be a good form of assessment.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump to question 3 because it threads in nicely here. Is there a way or different ways to incorporate the use of AI in the writing classroom that doesn't negatively impact the acquisition and practice, the things we hold dear, self-expression, creativity, critical thinking, deep and nuanced engagement, the journey or the process for the student. So I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about now is, where are those assignments? I mean, being in the center here, I have seen some hopeful evidence that, and sometimes it's just making sure those undergraduates have the ability to be a critic like Danny is, because then when you shared with us that, hey, I've been there and I've done this, and I was doing ChatGPT before they even called it that, right? That has credence, right? It's because you know of what you're critiquing. So, and I think for our undergraduates, my thing is you could have assignments where you set them up to show that they still got something that this doesn't have, and set them up to find and critique. We had a great class on campus. I think it's still, astronomy, and the concept was there's life on other planets, and you can watch the hokey stuff out there, or you can do the Drake equation and it can be an astronomy class, and you can do the math on it. But the assignment was to have students go on, YouTube and the web and find the silliest, craziest stuff and pseudoscience and debunk it. So I think with AI, there's at least the opportunity to have students go on little journeys to see that, well, AI maybe isn't all that, right? I don't know.
I also, and I think we're kind of alluding to this, I think that we have to have different goals for how we're incorporating AI into teaching based on the discipline and the standing of the course. I would have extremely different goals for working with a first-year freshman as opposed to a graduating senior. And part of that is that over our time, we're building up those metacognitive and critical thinking skills, which are going to boost students' ability to engage with AI as a useful tool rather than something that is substituting for cognition. And somebody, I think, raised the idea of cognitive debt earlier. And if I'm understanding, that's maybe referring to an MIT study that's kind of circulating right now that had an experiment with students engaged in different writing activities, where some of them first produced LLM writing, like several essays that are produced by that. And then some started with brain writing first. So they wrote their own essays, and then eventually each was allowed to revise using the other mode, right? Or like to rewrite using another mode. And what they're seeing is so much greater cognitive engagement with the brain session first, right? Students are actually engaged in that work of discovery and maybe a little bit of struggle, but trying to develop the content and the order of it. And they also found that they understood what they had written better, as opposed to the students who, generated the LLM produced essays, which I think should not be surprising. And also that there was much greater lexical variety and variety in the topics themselves for those that started in the brain produced version first. And I think talking with students about that, and also building classrooms that scaffold things in that way, so that we say we're going to start by doing the work, but then we're going to incorporate a tool and reflect on the process and the utilities and the inefficiencies within that process. And I think that's a way to build up those literacy skills a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that brain work. First, I'm assuming it's individual, and some of you know the sociology and the studies on brainstorming. But and collaborative is so great, and that's what I love your course, and I'm all about collaborative. But if we were brainstorming, the classic thing is, well, 5 minutes, do it alone, separately, and then 5 minutes later, then come. And when they do those studies, there's many more ideas and more diversity of idea if you start with the individual before you go collective or, AI telling me what to do or something. Andrew, do you want to weigh in? I see.
No, thanks. No.
Well, let's jump to, I'm gonna jump to question 4. Writing is a time-intensive activity. It's an act of faith. You're building knowledge, transferable skills. We're selling students on this side, the time and effort will pay off. You'll end up with something worth saying. How can we as educators make the case to students that writing is a discovery process? That time spent writing is time spent learning, and that time spent learning isn't wasted time. And I think that transcends just writing, right? That's kind of, you show up at quad day and it's sort of like, okay, we're gonna try to convince you students that some of this effort and time is worth it. So any thoughts on that?
So I think like it's kind of like an intersection between like time, labor, and desire. And I think we often kind of ignore the desire of what students may bring into the classroom. And so like what is that, what do they want out of the classroom? We have like a syllabus that tells them what they're going to learn, what they need to learn. But we don't often like think like how might this be helpful for what their particular goals are. Especially I think we see this more often in those like core requirement classes where students are only taken because they're told they have to take it and it checks a box. And so they're not really often thinking about like, oh, how will this be beneficial to me, myself as an individual going forward? And so I think we need to think about like how can we, use the beginning of that semester of that course kind of scaffolding a little bit to of that individual aspect for each student to allow that space for them to think through how might that class be beneficial for them going forward before we get to like, okay, now these are the major things in the class you need to learn. Because I think I think they maybe will think about like, okay, maybe I don't need to use this technology then because I can see the benefit and I desire for that benefit to actually pay off. And so I need to put that time in to actually learn and be productive and think about like how I can do this on my own before using a technology in a way that's going to take over that process for me.
Wait, when I look at this question, I'm reminded, I think this is still on topic, but maybe it's slightly off topic, but one of my jobs as director of the writers workshop is I get to go talk to huge groups of students in classes and orientations and tell them about the writers workshop and why we're here for you. But one of the questions I usually ask there is like, show of hands, who likes writing? And not a lot of hands go up, and maybe like a few tentative hands. And then, I like to ask like, well, do you like certain types of writing? And a lot of students have journaling practices or songwriting practices or creative writing practices. But when they think of academic writing, they think of test prep writing, they think of the 5-paragraph essay. This is deadening and dull work. So I think one thing that we have an opportunity to do is to remind them that writing is discovery, and at a university like Illinois, right? Like we have groundbreaking discoveries that are being facilitated through writing and communicated through writing. So reminding students that like we have many purposes, but it is something that is exciting and knowledge building. And part of what we're doing in a class like Comp 1 is building up that skill set to reach those higher levels of knowledge distribution.
I just want to pick up on that because I think this kind of goes back to thinking about like the teacher's role in that motivating to discovery. Because I think oftentimes what you're kind of talking about, like students have like this drudgery of writing, like, and I feel like this echoes like the drudgery of grading and why we look at how a bunch of especially when it comes to writing and all like these softwares that get created to grade the writing for you. And so we got to think about like we actually want to engage with our students' work and actually show that motivation. Like I do care about what you're creating because I think most of the time students are going to be in that position of where they don't think that we care about what they're writing. So therefore, like, well, if they're not really going to read it or they're going to just slap an A on it or a B or a C, then then what's the point in me actually spending that time into it? There's no desire to spend that time.
No, Antonio, I love that, you know, I've done many years of campus and came out of English and media background, but in consulting with people, even yesterday, but for the last 20 years, I always tell teachers, why create any assignment, especially a writing assignment, that you don't want to read, that doesn't have a real audience, that other students don't want to read? And if it's just written in isolation formulaically to be handed off to be graded, that's the most inauthentic, boring. And so, but you kind of, and well, time and the faculty and even the teaching faculty are busy, but it's a little exciting to say, well, okay, I get to do, it's interesting how in the institution and what we've inherited, we don't feel free. Some of us, even full professors, you mean I can do that? I could really change an assignment to be fun and exciting, and I want to do it, and everybody wants to read it, and we celebrate them. And so when that happens, that becomes more authentic and collaborative, and that's why Andrew, and some of this, you know, some of these things that are tried and true, like what you're doing with your students, and then you bring human-centered design and ethnographic and collaborative and real audiences, and for profession, business and technical writing, it's a lot of realness there, as opposed to turning in something to be red inked. What did you say?
Yeah, make a paper bleed.
Make the paper bleed.
Yeah, Antonio, I'm glad you brought up our response, right, to students. I mean, one of the ways to make the case to students is to tell them, right, on their writing assignments and in your responses to it, or even design writing assignments that ask students to describe how they were self-expressive, how they were creative, how they thought critically during an assignment, right? Like sort of complementary assignments that talk about choices, right, in an assignment.
Yeah.
And one can comment on those. Those are good ideas too. And to be just a little cynical in the service of hopefulness, people who want good grades will spend a lot of good time on those reflective assignments. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a little transactional, but they will start describing their creativity and talking about it.
We had another question that I liked it because it's a really kind of unique take, I think. I think Dave, you came up with it, but it's the one on the author's relationship to their own writing. How does using AI affect writers' perception of their own writing? And then I combined your question, but related to that is the reader's relationship to a text. If I'm reading something from AI, you know, you were so passionate and eloquent about reading stuff from real authors and real humans, and you know, I'll remind us all, I guess, AI doesn't have a biography, but yet it's speaking to us in language, so it's always pulling us back into that pathetic fallacy, past the Turing test. If it sounds like a human with an identity, it has no biography or history. But I like that, the writer's perception of your own writing in the age of AI, and readers, your sense as a reader. Yeah. Your question, so maybe somebody else.
I mean, it goes back to that MIT study that you mentioned, Carolyn, and I think it's very true that, you know, people who, you know, sort of go straight to AI to write their work, it's been shown that they not only feel less personally like that's theirs, but they also understand it less. And I think that it's an interesting sort of question of like, when do you bring in the AI that people have been sort of touching on, which is something I've been thinking about. It's like, well, what about like getting feedback or getting suggestions from AI, especially like, you know, that play the role of my biggest critic, like using some good prompt engineering, giving it an identity. You know, you are a cynical critic who like has lost the joy of reading, or you know, whatever. And I think that like that sort of use of it, you know, still very much puts the writer in the position of authority. And I like that idea. And then I've also commented at length about the idea of the reader's relationship, so I'll let you all talk.
I'd like to hear, does anyone know of studies on, and I don't want to say reader reception, but I'm going to say it, reader's reception of work they take to be AI generated? I was just talking to somebody who was not a writing instructor, who was ticked about an email chain in which somebody had clearly used AI to respond. This is someone who doesn't know a lot about writing. I would love to hear those folks' reception of AI writing and present that to students, right? Like this person was so angry. If my students in a BTW class could hear this person saying, I'm just insulted. I know I can't say why it was AI generated, but I know they just responded here with AI. I wonder if that would help students think about AI. Yeah, and whether or not to use it. Sorry.
No, I mean, the main stories that I know about are more of an experimental design and
Yeah.
kind of like showcasing, like, is this a student text or is this an AI text, and how would you rate each of them, and that kind of thing. But I don't think that they're giving like a public reader's response, or I
Yeah.
haven't encountered that myself.
No, I think it's a very fertile thing, and maybe the author isn't dead after all. Our illusion of we wish was an author, and I will say, it's, you know, like many things that's complicated, the little bit I've read and seen is the closer it is to authentic and real and caring, and, you know, if I gave my wife an anniversary card and, you know, that's in the movie Her and it's played up a bit, but then you have examples like the New York Times about a year ago had an article, you know, the healthcare system and doctors fighting for their patients. And so, you know, I'm a surgeon, I'm a doctor, I'm sitting down, I've got the data, my patient, I care about my patient and the insurance companies, and I've got to write and fight for something. Now I can write and I can do 5 of them, or I can have AI and I can do 12 of these letters in the hour I have. And so it's coming from a real place and a human concern. So the AI that doctors are using to fight for patients' health and life with the big financial corporate health companies, is that good? You know, so I mean, you know, ethics is complicated, right? And so it's like that's a use of, and I think, well, maybe it's answering our question. It's starting with doctors and real patients and real passion and real information. And the doctor's then reviewing it, and so it's customized and specific and personal, but the AI is helping me do something good in bigger numbers. So it's a complicated world that we're living in these days.
Yeah, I think you're like touching on intention of AI use, and I think often that kind of gets lost in the art in this conversation, like why people use it is not because they're trying to cheat or just to get a good grade. I mean, even with the email example, you could even maybe say the student was fearful of like not responding in the correct way, and so therefore they thought maybe AI would help them craft the response to their instructor that was going to be what they think their instructor would most likely respond to. Not saying that's the case, but
There was a corporate setting, actually.
oh yeah, so I feel like thinking about like why people use it, or even if you think about this context in regards to like maybe ESL student like using, you know, AI to sound, and especially in a Western context, to sound more like a native English speaker or a native English writer. Is that bad? Is that good? Like, and how do you, you know, have that conversation, and how do you determine like what is good or what is bad?
Yeah, I love you brought that up, Antonio, and the intentionality and the purpose and the meaning. And, you know, we were going to, unfortunately, we couldn't have the intensive English folks here, and English as a second language. You also had presented a question on standard English and non-standard English. And, you know, when we've talked to students and even grad students all the way up to the PhD around English as a second language and their use of AI for writing, it becomes a more generous thing when you hear them talking about their in the spirit of which the Intensive English Institute is using AI, along with the traditional verities of the second language acquisition. You know, the students want to learn, and they're using AI sometimes to show me more polite, less polite, more formal, less formal. And it's a different thing than somebody hitting the easy button we've been talking about. And they legitimately are, it's back to your intentionality point. Undergrad, whatever graduate, they're really working hard to develop their language skills, and AI is a tool they can use. But if you want to talk about the standard English versus non-standard English, and I think Carolyn came to you that it's that.
I wrote a really long question about this. But so see if I can boil it down a little bit. So we're sort of recognizing that students are often grappling to balance correctness. And when I say correctness, I'm usually speaking about standardized edited American English with, you know, sounding right, sounding like a native speaker, or sounding like myself, which can be different from those. How do panelists feel about AI's ability to quote unquote level the playing field for students who speak and write in non-dominant Englishes or languages other than English? Or might it further distance students from a privileged dialect and identity? And maybe to what extent does generative AI reinforce the perception that there's one standard way to write in academic contexts? Does it inherently undermine voice, multiplicity, and creativity? And I said academic writing, but we could go broadly. And I guess as I was writing this, I was thinking about a couple of things. And one of the things that I was thinking about is the way that fields like writing studies have fought since the 1970s to make a place for multiple Englishes. And even strategies like code meshing, where students can bring in multiple languages, dialects, technocratic lingo, as one of the scholars might say, into their writing, right? So this embrace of multiplicity, creativity, and diversity of voice in academic writing. And of course, it has found a place more in some fields than others, right? More in the humanities or social sciences than in some of our STEM fields. And we know that when AI produces text for students, it's typically coded in standardized American English. And I know scholars have played even with encouraging it to produce academic Black language or things like that. And it's a struggle. It's a stereotype and an embarrassment. So we know that the bias is built into the system. So I think that we do have to ask ourselves, like, how are we modeling what it means to be an academic writer or a writer through the types of text that is produced through these tools? And the other thing that I'm thinking about here is that there is a digital divide. Like we know that that's longstanding and that remains with AI. So is that also further actually distancing some students from feeling like they are at a level playing field? So I think it's a complicated conversation. Antonio, I know you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the last thought first on the digital divide. Yeah, because I definitely think like, who has access to these technology, and if you even think about ChatGPT specifically, is a pay tiered. I mean, so you're automatically saying now language is commodified, and that if you're able to afford it, you can potentially speak or write the best English that you possibly can. But if you can't, then what does that say to students who want to genuinely use this tool as a way to better enhance their writing? And if they can't afford it, then that's you could say there's a lack of fairness in that regard. And then I'm touching on like the larger point of like standardization. I feel like if students are using this, or whoever students, people in the public domain, whoever is using this technology, it's giving you one style of writing. So like if you're using that and you're pumping that out, then I'm thinking like just kind of long term, kind of you touched on this a little bit about like if that writing then gets put into the system to be trained on, then we're just creating a continuous cycle of like, this is the only way to write correctly, quote unquote. And so like, where is that diversity in writing? Where's the point where we're able to, break genre or invent genre or to toy around with genre and modify it to best fit our needs? And we're just kind of just like regurgitating the same cycle because the AI doesn't have those lived experiences that would motivate it to break the genre. And even if you do tell ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever to break this genre in this certain way, it's still doing it within the context of your prompt in regards to its training data. So I even think like, what is the limitations there? Like if without those lived experiences. And so I think like there's like hesitancy of just going along with what ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or whatever says. Because even I think like if you tell it to revise, it's going to find something wrong with your writing. If you tell it like so, it's not like it's always going to give you feedback. So at what point is your writing good or not good or whatnot? So it's kind of like this balance of how do you navigate that?
Just one more thing. I think this idea of standardization also reinforces the idea that there is one way to write, and that's something that is tied also with feelings of belongingness, writer's block and writing anxiety and writing apprehension, that that sense that like to submit something, it has to be a perfect piece. And I think that's something that if we're talking about like temptations for students to use tools like AI or ChatGPT, I think that's a real propeller in some ways. So I think part of the conversation here too is like recognizing that it's okay to have infelicities in the learning process of writing and playfulness and to find your own academic voice, which is something that we're all engaged in. And people who write are constantly like playing with finding the voice of myself and my voice within my field. That's a conversation we have a lot with graduate students as well. But maybe I'm drifting now. I don't know. Yeah.
No, what you're making me think, it's wonderful stuff, but you're making me think of, things are moving so fast, and even today in the panel yesterday and all the conversation, we have these critiques of AI as monolithic, summary, a single voice. And yet we all know examples of the micro, that it being used in people prompting in very narrow things, I'm talking to Emily Dickinson or, whatever. And so that's happening, and it's more, back to one of these future, where's the world going? Is it, and companies that are competing, and academics on our own campus, we have something called Illinois Chat where you can, so we're gonna see more stuff where it's individual voices and maybe an AI that and with its facility with multiple languages and non-standard languages. So I don't know, it's just a strange thing to think about. We have this critique of it as monolithic and evidence of it, but at the same time, is it hopeful that maybe some academics will battle and fight and peel off things for more interesting, poetic and human? I think the stuff you pointed to were artists who were really zeroing in very unique voices and spaces. I don't think it's gonna be happy. Another question to you is, the students that came to you before AI and now, what do you tell them about standard English and non-standard English, especially if they're south of Green Street and they're not scientists?
We always tell students that academic English is no one's first language. We're all engaged in acquiring academic vocabulary and the conventions and standards of our fields. I think one of the biggest changes we've probably seen is students come in and they say, does this sound like a robot wrote it? So they're still concerned about voice and a sense of originality. And so they're coming to our writing assistants to kind of get a check on that writing assistance. But I think that's one of the bigger changes that we've seen probably. But still a struggle to find that voice.
No,
right?
it's still very much struggle. I want to touch on, because something you just said, there is a AI software, I can't remember what it's called, that I haven't tried it out because you pay for it. I'm like, okay. But like it alleges that it can write like you, but you have to upload a bunch of your stuff to it, which goes with issues of surveillance. And so it's like, in order for this technology to have more of that individuality or identity or voice like you have to give it more of you in order for it to know how to write like you. And so I think that then becomes the issue, is efficiency that much of a concern that you feel you have to turn to a technology to do the work for you?
We're gonna wrap up here, but that segue the surveillance issue, but another question we have about privacy, property, patent law, all that, the law's changing because the world's kind of blown up on who owns what. But it's always been a little fraught for, if we come back to the student, what does a student own? In terms of their work and writing. The blue books, we're gonna keep your stuff and nobody cares. I mean, there's an interesting tradition. If you're a student painter or maybe a performing artist, even then, there's a little, it was always strange even before AI, does a student actually own her stuff? But with AI here now too, and the tools where campus is providing and trying to provide for them, who owns or not know, or are we allowing the data and the works of the students to be harvested for companies? And there's the effort to keep it local, but that sense of ownership, which comes back to like, who owns it and who controls it, and are we setting up our students to be sort of pawns in a thing with not many rights or something? that's a big topic. Maybe we'll get the lawyers in here for that.
Well, I think, you brought up Illinois chat, right? So
Yeah.
that's like the local, like the homegrown GPT like models, right? And then they use all this open source software. So I do think there is something to be said about homegrown open sourcing, keeping things local at your institution and controlling that stuff. Because
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a laptop with a certain type of processor, you can actually just build an AI chatbot on it, right?
Yeah.
And it can be all yours, and you can have whatever conversations you want with it. No one will know about it. Or if you have the resources, build a supercomputer over there.
Yeah.
And then CSA, and then scale it out to campus.
Yeah.
And then each person can build their own little custom chatbot, so you don't have to sell your soul, right? So
Yeah,
I think there's a balance.
yeah,
for
no,
sure,
they're
right?
across the Big Ten in the country, but in the Big Ten, that is effort, and we happen to have NCSA, so there are legitimate efforts where campuses, I think, are trying to shelter a little bit away from giving everything to the companies and fighting for that. So I mean, those are good causes. The last one too is, I mean, sustainability. So this one, Peter Mortensen was going to be here, but he had a lot of great questions at the kind of higher level. Accreditation might change in the world based on AI. Comp 1, advanced composition, writing across the curriculum, all kinds of things. Scholarly writing might change. But on sustainability, our campus has a commitment to the Institute for Sustainability, Energy and Environment, administers the Illinois Climate Action Plan. The most recent plan was published in 2020. If and when the plan is updated, should it account for the energy massive amounts consumed remotely that powers the generative AI applications used by faculty, students, and staff. I will say in the panel yesterday, the energy use of AI is both massive, but then in some cases, desktop, not so much, and it's changing so quick. But everybody seems to be rightfully concerned about the energy consumption and the infrastructure for AI. And if our institution is committed to the environment and energy and none of us I know are experts in this area, but I mean, I think we all care a bit and pay attention. So. Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I didn't raise my hand, but
Sorry.
no, I was thinking like, yeah, this is something that I've done a fair bit of research about, and like there's some things which I don't know how deeply into the weeds we want to go on it, but like you have to separate the amount of energy investment and like water and whatnot that goes into like the training of the model versus the deployment. Dan, you mentioned, like there's local models that you can get, like a 30 billion or 70 billion parameter model, which you can run on, fairly standard like consumer hardware, which it doesn't have the same level of coherence or knowledge or et cetera as something like, the trillion parameter models that you have from something like, OpenAI, but, you can use it for sort of lay people purposes. And but at the same time, like I saw somewhere, like I did research about like what level, like how much energy do these things use, and between like pre-training and like the deployment of models, it seems like AI uses roughly in the same ballpark of energy as like all like video gaming across the world. Like if you took like everybody playing like Fortnite on like their computer or their like PlayStation or something, like that's roughly the same. And like we don't have a moral panic about the energy use of that, but I think that that's because it's so like deeply ingrained in our culture. And now I think that we sort of have to ask ourselves, like, are we willing to invest, or I guess we are, so many more billions of dollars and other currencies into building, these Sam Altman wants like mini nuclear power plants and whatnot to power the AI models, and communities I think are also seeing the effect of this, like as we're building out our power needs, we also need, for example, more lithium, and we know lithium mines have a tremendous negative impact on local environments and drinking water, and it's all very, very complicated, and like I do think that this is something that we need to be talking about and considering.
Thanks for that. And what's great, the Institute and our students and then the professionals who study this are actively thinking about these things, and it's a wicked problem. But I'm glad we've got Illinois people thinking about it, and young students who care and are fighting for this. But any last question from our audience or online? One last thought or question?
There are no questions. Jamie did share an article about Meta signing the 20-year deal for energy.
Oh,
Illinois.
Yeah, nice. Well, I just want to thank the panel. It's got my head spinning on many things, and I just think we went into this summer of AI wanting to not be rah-rah about AI and not to be just only critical and I mean, so the thoughtful criticism here and that sounds okay, and then some glimmers of hope, and I think just part of the thought too was the value and importance of writing in our students' life and in the institutional responsibility and wanting to, fight for that and say we've got good people on the case and the evidence we're seeing from students is that they have thoughtful, critical, smart ideas about how they are thinking about AI with and without AI in their writing in their lives and maybe we'll figure out a few things as we go forward. Prashemik.
So I'll try to leave I don't know if there's even a question in there, but a couple of observations, but I'd love to hear your take on my observation. First of all, is you're all writers, okay? And when I'm thinking about my work, okay, or any student work, okay, I don't think any of us aspire to, or most of us aspire to write like Emily Dickinson, or we have our heroes, whoever that hero might be. I get to hear someone say, I want to write like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever that model is, okay? And secondly, we all like making things, okay? Take a 4-year-old, that kid wants to knead the dough and make that pasta. They don't want the mom or the grandma to make that. And so, what I'm thinking of when it comes to creative endeavors or any endeavor whatsoever, okay? A little bit of my background. So I worked as a band teacher for quite some time before I got this job. And I spoke with a friend who's not a musician about the fact that whenever we took our students to a solo contest, okay, that everyone got a participation trophy, okay? And he had a very, very, very awesome, made a very awesome version. He said, that may be so. And I was like, why are we rewarding even these weak players with medals or what have you? And he said, but that kid who didn't perform well, he or she knows that they do not deserve that medal. Internally, they're aware of the fact that they sucked at the contest, and then that award, that they don't really deserve it. So, I'm thinking about, us making things, okay? If we take the shortcut and use whatever AI, internally we do, or those students, they do know that they don't deserve that. You can game the system and you can even deceive yourself for so long until, your conscience is starting to gnaw at you and then say, well, is this real? What am I doing? Who am I trying to deceive? If you see what I'm saying.
I think often when I speak to Antonio about this, he says the contract you're really breaking, like as a student, if you're generating your content with ChatGPT, is with yourself, right? It's an ethical contract with yourself, and that you're not learning and you're not getting the skills that you are paying a lot of money for. So I think that's absolutely true, or that part of it. Yeah.
And as a youth soccer coach, I will say participation trophies have in the title participation. And when you're young, participating, if you think about it that way, there are kids and people and humans that are not participating. So, and I know you're a generous spirit and you were a great band teacher, I'm sure. And I'm going to go to my grandkids' music lesson here in 45 minutes. And so, but yeah, it is participation. And, but to participate is that back to that journey and that path, right? And at least you're trying. And, some of those kids be a decent oboe player in 5 years.
No, of course. Yeah, but you see, everybody wants to be as good of a shooter as Stephen Curry, not the Stephen Curry, not the one from the video game. Or everyone wants to, when they're studying guitar, they want to play like Eddie Van Halen, not the Eddie Van Halen from Guitar Hero. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We aspire to be like other humans, not the avatars or the video game characters.
I think there might be a little bit of hallucination that ChatGPT can or whatever can potentially get them closer to maybe that idealization. I mean, I don't, I think when students do use it in those cases, I don't think they'll say, I want to write like ChatGPT, but I think they're like, I want to sound like X or sound like an A or a B paper. And so this technology may help me sound like that. Cause I've seen students prompt it like, write me a paper or whatnot, or and I think it's that desire to get that grade. And so I think that goes back to because the conversation earlier, like how did we change how we teach or education in a way that says, okay, yes, I mean, this is probably a larger conversation about evaluation and how we do assessment, but like I think that it has to be part of that this conversation of how do we get students to like be more engaged in that process and less about the product.
Inspiration,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, we yeah.
I'd love to hear more about the thrill of that hallucination from students upon seeing what they thought was their ideas take some sort of shape that they then believe was something that they created. That's got to be pretty, seductive. And I wonder if it's not even bad or unethical, right? A student who sees it on paper and thinks, yeah, that is me. I wonder how that works in terms of affect and cognition.
Yeah, if a student sees something and they learn something from an AI and they say, I can use this, I can transfer this to some other place in my life that would be valuable. And are we to tell them that they shouldn't do that? I don't know.
I've seen, a bunch of this in, like online spaces, like with art or writing, where people I think will have a sort of a ghost of an idea, and then they'll put it into AI and use that to iterate and build it out. And they'll say, this is my world, like for world building, the fantasy world. Like I built this and I'm reading this and I'm sort of saying this is very tropey. I'm seeing all of the cliches. I'm seeing how, like this is pulling from like 20 different things that I'm already familiar with and like building something. And I think that there's something which there's a tendency that this hallucination, like you're saying, to say like, oh yeah, like I built this is mine, I would build this together, and to sort of not recognize that this is not something new. And I'm also thinking about like from like all the stories that I've read, like I sort of start to recognize the sort of AI written characters. And it's funny because like different models will have like different characters that tend to tend towards. But like if you prompt it like with very complex, nuanced characters, then they inevitably become flanderized, if you're familiar with that term, into like one or two character points that the AI keeps hitting over and over again. And then people can look at that and say like, oh, like we've created this story together, but inevitably it becomes, like that ChatGPT written, like romance novel or like Netflix show, which feels just like every other Netflix show or romance novel you've ever read.
Thanks everyone for a great panel, and we do appreciate it, and we're going to be talking about this for maybe the rest of our lives. So yes, thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing.